What would you do if the world looked you in the eye and said you don't belong here? Not because you lacked the right ticket, not because you hadn't earned your place, but simply because of who you are. For two teenage sisters, Amara and Ayanna, this wasn't a hypothetical question. It was their reality. With first-class boarding passes in hand, they were told to step aside, their dignity stripped away in front of strangers. In that moment, they faced a choice: accept the humiliation quietly, or stand tall and claim their right to be seen. Now imagine it was you, your child, your family being treated as if they didn't deserve the seat they had earned. Would you bow your head and walk away? Or would you push back against the silence that allows injustice to thrive? One phone call changed everything. Their father, David Cole, a man who built power through quiet determination, answered that call, and with it, he pulled the plug on more than just a flight. He challenged an entire system. This is not just their story. It could be any of ours. Stay with us, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next will stay with you. The morning sun spilled across the polished floors of Newark Liberty International Airport. Travelers hurried past, dragging suitcases, sipping their morning coffee, glancing at departure screens like dancers in a well-rehearsed routine. Amid the hum of voices and rolling wheels stood two girls who looked almost identical, yet each carried a different kind of energy. Amara Cole, 15, calm-eyed and deliberate, adjusted the strap of her backpack. Beside her, her twin sister Ayanna bounced on her sneakers, brimming with nervous excitement. The sisters wore matching denim jackets and soft hoodies, simple and comfortable. Nothing about them announced privilege, though their story carried more weight than any stranger around them could guess. They weren't ordinary passengers. They were the daughters of David Cole, the CEO of Horizon Airways, one of the most influential figures in American aviation. But today, at this moment, they weren't thinking about corporate power or headlines. They were thinking about a youth leadership conference in San Francisco, a chance to learn, to be seen, to carve out their own identities apart from the shadow of their father's name. "This is it," Ayanna whispered, glancing at the tall glass windows where sunlight poured in. "First trip without Dad, without the assistants, without anyone." Amara smiled, though a knot twisted in her stomach. "It's just a flight," she said softly. "We've done this a dozen times. We'll be fine." But deep down, Amara knew this wasn't just a trip. It was a test. Their father had trusted them to fly on their own, to show responsibility. He had reminded them at the kitchen table just yesterday, his voice firm but kind. Do everything right. Girls, be early, be prepared, and remember sometimes you can do everything right. And still, people won't see you fairly. Don't let it shake who you are. Those words echoed now as they made their way through the bustling terminal. They had their boarding passes, their passports, even the signed unaccompanied minor forms tucked neatly in Amara's folder. Their father had insisted on it. At security. Ayanna joked as she slipped off her shoes. "Maybe we'll meet a movie star on the plane." Amara rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her grin. Normal teenage chatter, blending into the crowd. Yet as they passed through the scanner, she felt the weight of someone's eyes. A guard stared too long, his expression hard. For a moment, Amara wondered if he saw them not as two bright girls bound for a conference, but as something else entirely. Two black teenagers who didn't fit his image of first-class travelers. She shook it off. They had nothing to hide. They moved on, collected their bags, and kept walking. At gate C-23, the announcement board flickered, "Liberty Skies." Flight 482 nonstop service to San Francisco. On time. Ayanna exhaled loudly, collapsing into a chair. We made it early, just like Dad drilled into us. We could have slept another half hour. That's not the point, Amara said, sitting beside her. Control what you can. That's what he always says. They laughed together, two sisters balancing each other out, one restless and quick to speak, the other measured and watchful. Outside the window, aircraft tails glistened in the sun, red and blue against the pale sky. Everything felt possible. For a few minutes, they were just two girls on the edge of an adventure. Amara pulled out a notebook, scribbling a list of the workshops she wanted to attend. Ayanna leaned over her shoulder, teasing her for planning too much. You need to live a little, she said, nudging her with her elbow. Amara shot her a mock glare. And you need to take something seriously. Their bickering drew a smile from an older woman nearby, who whispered to her husband, Twins. Reminds me of our girls when they were that age. It felt warm. It felt ordinary. Yet beneath that ordinariness lay tension, quiet and unspoken. Amara felt it when she caught a second glance from a man in a business suit who looked at their tickets, then at their faces, as if he were calculating something. She felt it in the way an airport employee's smile faltered when the girls approached to ask a question about boarding times. Tiny cracks, subtle things you could ignore until they added up. But for now, the girls pushed it aside. They toasted with plastic cups of orange juice from the cafe, imagining the flight, imagining California, imagining what the conference might bring. Amara closed her eyes for a second, breathing in the airport air, heavy with coffee and jet fuel. She wanted to believe this was the start of something bright. She had no idea that within hours, their names, Amara and Ayanna Cole, would be trending across the nation. No idea that their father would be forced to wield power in ways he'd never planned. No idea that a single boarding call would unravel into humiliation, defiance, and finally, a reckoning for an entire industry. For now, they were just two sisters waiting at Gate C-23, blissfully unaware of the storm rising on the horizon. The loudspeaker crackled with the familiar rhythm of boarding announcements. Travelers shifted restlessly, some queuing early, some searching for snacks, others juggling phones and laptops. Amara and Ayanna sat close together, each pretending to read their magazines, though both pairs of eyes strayed often to the gate counter. Ayanna nudged her sister. You noticed that she whispered. Amara looked up. A man in a navy blazer, one of the TSA supervisors, stood just beyond the stanchions. His eyes flicked toward the twins again and again, never resting long enough to be obvious, but always circling back. He carried a clipboard tucked under his arm, his posture stiff, as though he were waiting for a reason. Yes, Amara murmured, trying not to stare back. He's been watching since security. Ayanna's lips curled into a defiant smirk. Maybe he thinks we're celebrities. Amara didn't laugh. Her mind replayed their father's words. Do everything right. And sometimes it still won't be enough. She wanted to brush it off, to tell herself it was coincidence, but the unease rooted deeper with every passing minute. The twins rose when pre-boarding was called for families with children. Though they were old enough to travel alone, their tickets carried the unaccompanied minor stamp. They walked to the front of the line, boarding passes ready. The agent behind the podium, a young man with glasses, gave them a quick smile. Enjoy your flight, he said as the scanner beeped. For a moment, relief washed over Amara. Smooth. Normal. They walked the jet bridge, feeling the air cool as the tunnel descended toward the waiting aircraft. The smell of fuel mingled with the faint tang of recycled air. Inside, the cabin buzzed with the choreography of departure passengers stowing bags, attendants directing traffic, the hum of overhead vents. The twins slid into their seats, 1A and 1B, the coveted first row. Ayanna grinned, pressing her face to the oval window. "Best seats in the house," she whispered. Amara sat straighter, savoring the plush leather, the space in front of her legs. For once, it felt like independence had been rewarded. Then came the pause. A shadow in the aisle. The flight attendant, Susan Miller, stood with her arms crossed, her blonde hair wound into a severe bun. Her smile was tight, not reaching her eyes. She leaned down slightly, scanning their tickets again as if the numbers might have changed. "Good morning," she said flatly. "Are you traveling alone?" "Yes, ma'am," Amara answered politely. "We're headed to a conference in San Francisco." Susan's eyes shifted, skeptical. "No guardian with you? No adult on board?" Ayanna frowned. "We have all the paperwork. Our dad arranged everything. We've flown like this before." Susan didn't move. "I'll need to check with the purser about unaccompanied minors in first class." Her words carried a rehearsed rhythm, but the undertone was unmistakable suspicion. Passengers nearby glanced over, curiosity prickling. Amara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She opened her folder, pulling out the neat stack of documents, the consent forms, the copies of IDs, the ticket receipts, everything in order. She offered them silently. Susan barely glanced at the papers before nodding curtly. "Please remain seated." She disappeared up the aisle. Ayanna exhaled sharply. What was that about? We had no problem at check-in. Amara pressed her lips together. "Just, let's wait. Don't make it worse." But waiting didn't calm her. Every second, the weight of the other passengers' eyes grew heavier. She could feel the narrative writing itself in their gazes. Two young black girls, maybe out of place, maybe suspicious, maybe not supposed to be here. When Susan returned, she wasn't alone. A tall man trailed behind her, his posture awkward. His name tag read Tom Weaver. He glanced at the sisters, cleared his throat, then spoke in a low voice that carried far too easily. "We'll need to verify your boarding passes once more. There's been some confusion about unaccompanied minors in first class. If you could step off the plane with us, we'll settle this at the desk." Ayanna's eyes widened. "Step off the plane. Why, we're already seated." Tom avoided her gaze. "It's just protocol. Miss, best to resolve it outside." The words cut sharper than any shout. Around them, passengers stiffened, whispering, adjusting in their seats. Amara's heart hammered. She thought of her father, of his calm warnings. She wanted to protest, to demand respect. But she also knew the rules of survival. Don't escalate. Don't give them more reason. She gathered her bags slowly, her hands trembling despite her effort to appear composed. Ayanna muttered under her breath, "This is ridiculous." Together they followed Susan and Tom back up the aisle, heads bowed, cheeks burning. The jet bridge felt colder this time, longer, each step echoing with humiliation. At the gate counter, a woman with clipped hair and a forced smile waited. Paula Griffin, duty manager. Her tone was falsely sweet. "Good morning, ladies. We just need to verify some details about your travel." Amara handed over the forms again. Paula flipped through them, page after page, pausing just long enough to suggest doubt. Finally, she looked up, eyes narrow. "This is your first time flying with Liberty Skies?" "Yes," Ayanna answered, her voice clipped. "Our dad usually books us on Horizon." The mention of Horizon, the rival airline, cast a flicker across Paula's expression. Something sharper, more guarded. "Well," she said briskly, "we have certain protocols. It's unusual for minors traveling alone to sit in first class without adult supervision. I'm afraid we'll need to reseat you and coach. Or, if you prefer, we can arrange a later flight when an adult can accompany you." Amara blinked, stunned. "That's not a policy. We've flown other airlines. First class is a fare class, not an age privilege." "I'm sorry," Paula said, though her tone carried no apology. "We reserve the right to deny boarding if we feel uncomfortable with the situation." Uncomfortable. The word lodged like a stone in Amara's chest. They weren't dangerous. They weren't disruptive. They were simply present, and that was enough to make someone uncomfortable. Tears pricked her eyes, but she held them back. Ayanna's fist tightened around her straps. Passengers nearby shifted uneasily, watching the exchange. One man raised his phone. "Recording. This isn't fair." Ayanna burst out. "We have the tickets, the documents. You can even call our dad right now. He'll explain." Paula's smile thinned. "That won't be necessary." She gestured to a colleague. "Please escort them back to the seating area," and just like that, the decision was final. The gate door shut behind the last boarding passengers. The plane was gone. Amara and Ayanna sat in the waiting area, hearts racing, humiliation burning. Out the wide glass. The aircraft pushed back, taxiing without them. Ayanna's voice cracked. "They kicked us off. Like we didn't belong." Amara swallowed hard, words failing her. She thought of their father's voice, steady and patient. "Sometimes you can do everything right." Now she knew exactly what he meant. The waiting area seemed too bright, too loud, every sound amplified against the ache in Amara's chest. The plane that should have carried them to San Francisco was already a dot in the sky. Around them, strangers whispered, some sympathetic, others curious. The glow of a phone screen caught Amara's eye. Someone had been filming. She saw the familiar posture of the gate, her own face pale and tight. Ayanna's voice sharp with frustration. The caption floated above the clip. 2 black teens kicked off first class. Why Ayanna dropped into a plastic chair, arms folded tight. "They humiliated us in front of everyone," she muttered, her voice raw. "Like we were criminals." Amara lowered herself beside her, still clutching the folder of documents as though proof of their innocence might shield them. "We did everything right," she whispered. "We were polite. We followed the rules. And still—" Her words trailed off. The memory of Susan's expression, Paula's false smile, Tom's awkward silence, it looped in her mind like a broken recording. They had followed procedure. Yet all it took was someone's discomfort to erase their right to belong. Across the terminal, a young man with a camera rig whispered to his phone, "This is insane. They had first-class tickets. They had all their forms. And Liberty Skies just pulled them off the plane." His live stream ticked upward hundreds, then thousands of viewers tuning in. Ayanna noticed, lifting her chin. Good. Let the world see. But Amara's stomach twisted. Attention meant exposure. She wanted justice. Yes, but she also wanted quiet. She wanted to disappear, to escape the weight of every eye dissecting her presence. The gate door slid shut again, sealing their exclusion. Paula Griffin disappeared into the staff room, leaving junior employees to field the restless crowd. Minutes stretched. Amara stared out the window where the sky was already empty. She thought of the conference in San Francisco, the workshops on youth leadership and justice. Ironic, she thought bitterly. They were supposed to be learning about speaking up for fairness. Instead, they had become the lesson. Ayanna's phone buzzed. She stared at the screen, then held it out to Amara. A flood of notifications filled the display tags on Twitter, reposts on Instagram. The clip of their removal was everywhere. The hashtag #LibertySkies trended, voices clashing in real time. Some demanded answers. Others dismissed it as entitlement, but the narrative had begun to spread beyond their control. Amara's chest tightened. "We need to call Dad." Ayanna hesitated. Their father had told them to handle small bumps in travel on their own. But this wasn't small. Her hand trembled as she pressed the number. The call rang twice before a deep, steady voice answered. "Dad," Amara said, her voice breaking, They made us get off the plane." A pause, then sharper, harder. "What do you mean, get off?" "They said unaccompanied minors can't sit in first class." Ayanna blurted. "But we had everything. We showed them. They didn't care. They looked at us like we didn't belong." Silence on the line. Amara could almost hear her father's breath, slow and controlled, the way he always did before making a decision. "Where are you now?" he asked finally. "Still at the gate. The flight left without us. Stay there. Don't speak to anyone else. I'll handle this." The call ended. Ayanna exhaled, leaning back in her chair. He sounded mad. Amara's pulse still raced. Not mad. Focused. That's worse. In his Manhattan office. David Cole paced the length of a glass-walled conference room. The documents for an upcoming merger lay abandoned on the table. He had spent decades navigating boardrooms, building Horizon Airways into an industry leader. But nothing in his career stirred him the way his daughters' voices had the quiver of humiliation, the sting of injustice they shouldn't have carried at 15. He picked up his phone again, dialing a number he knew by memory. Richard Halston, CEO of Liberty Skies, answered on the second ring. "David," Halston began, his tone strained. "I was just briefed. Some confusion at Newark. Something about minors traveling alone." "Confusion." David's voice was calm but edged with steel. "My daughters had tickets, documents, everything required. And your employees pulled them off a flight because they were minors, or because they were black minors in first class." Halston exhaled audibly. "Let me talk to my operations team. Sometimes staff misinterpret policy. We'll put them on the next flight. First class, lounge access, whatever's needed, we'll make it right." "That's not making it right," David replied. "That's covering it up. Back at Newark." The twins sat stiffly as the terminal buzzed around them. A woman approached, a middle-aged traveler who had watched everything unfold. She touched Amara's shoulder gently. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. It wasn't right." Amara managed a smile, though her throat ached. "Thank you. Nearby." The live streamer updated his audience. Word is their dad's the CEO of Horizon Airways. This is about to get big. Ayanna leaned close to Amara, her eyes flashing. Maybe now they'll listen. But Amara wasn't sure. She thought of her father's power, the reach of his influence. If he pushed, Liberty Skies could feel tremors across the industry. But what would that cost? Employees, passengers, families caught in the fallout of one discriminatory act. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her father. "Stay calm. It's being handled. Don't engage with staff. Don't engage with media. I'll call soon." Amara tucked the phone away, heart thudding. Beside her, Ayanna muttered, "Handled. He always says that. But this time, I think he means it." They sat in uneasy silence. Two sisters on the edge of a storm, watching as the airport world flowed around them. In Manhattan, David ended his call with Halston and dialed again, this time to his legal chief. His instructions were precise, his voice clipped. Pull our agreements, draft the notices. If Liberty won't acknowledge this, we will. The machinery of power began to turn, and at Newark, the twins could only wait 2 teenagers, still clutching their boarding passes, unaware that their humiliation at Gate C-23 was about to ignite headlines, boardrooms, and the conscience of an entire industry. The minutes dragged into nearly an hour. Boarding calls for other flights echoed through the terminal, reminders that life for everyone else was moving forward. While Amara and Ayanna sat stranded, their dignity left behind on a plane that had already reached cruising altitude. Then she returned. Paula Griffin walked out of the staff room with a folder in her hand, lips pressed into that same professional smile that never touched her eyes. She carried herself with the calm authority of someone who believed the matter was settled and that no one could question her judgment. She stopped in front of the sisters. "Ladies," she said smoothly, "I understand this has been inconvenient, but our policies exist for a reason. Safety and comfort for all passengers. I hope you can appreciate that." Amara blinked up at her, stunned by the audacity. Safety. We had valid tickets, documents. We weren't unsafe. Paula tilted her head, her smile sharp. Sometimes it's not about rules on paper. It's about judgment. My job is to make sure everyone feels comfortable on board. Ayanna shot up from her seat. Comfortable? You mean they... She jabbed a finger toward the closed gate door. Get to feel comfortable while we get humiliated. Her voice rose, and passengers around them turned their heads. Paula's expression didn't change. I'm asking you to lower your tone. Young lady, there are other families here. The word struck like a slap. Young lady, dismissive, condescending, reducing Ayanna's outrage to childish noise. Amara reached for her sister's arm, tugging gently, a silent plea to stay calm. But Paula wasn't finished. She leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice just enough to make the cruelty intimate. Look, if you weren't who you are, no one would even notice. Planes leave without people every day. The statement hung heavy between them. If they weren't who they were, the daughters of David Cole, the CEO of Horizon Airways, maybe their humiliation would have remained invisible, but a man nearby had heard. He shifted in his seat, muttering under his breath. Then he lifted his phone and tweeted the exact words, tagging Liberty Skies. Within minutes, replies began to surge. Ayanna's eyes blazed. She pulled free of Amara's hand and stepped forward. You didn't just deny us a seat, you denied us dignity. Her voice carried across the gate, raw and defiant. For the first time, Paula's smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. She turned sharply, retreating into the staff office, the click of her heels punctuating her exit. The terminal buzzed again, louder this time. People whispered, exchanged glances, glanced at their phones. The story was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to everyone watching, reading, recording. Amara sank back into her chair, hands trembling. She hated the eyes on her, hated being forced into a spectacle. Yet part of her knew Ayanna was right. Silence had never protected them. Speaking truth, even through pain, was the only weapon they had. Her phone vibrated again, a message from her father. Hold tight. There will be staff approaching soon. Do not agree to anything without me on the line. She read it twice, her stomach twisting. Staff approaching. Deals offered. Apology shaped not for sincerity, but for damage control. Ayanna leaned closer, lowering her voice. You think he's already pulling strings? Amara glanced at her sister, seeing the mix of anger and pride in her eyes. I think he's moving mountains, and Liberty Skies has no idea what's about to hit them. As if on cue, a pair of men in suits appeared at the far end of the concourse, badges clipped to their belts. They walked with brisk purpose toward the gate, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Passengers watched, whispering again. Cameras rose. Another layer of drama unfolded in real time. One of the men stopped near the counter, flashing credentials at the staff behind it. His voice carried, clipped and professional. We're here from corporate. We'll be handling this situation moving forward. Susan Miller and Tom Weaver, the flight attendants who had stood in judgment earlier, glanced nervously from the sidelines. Susan's jaw tightened. Tom shifted his weight, looking anywhere but at the twins. Paula emerged once more, her smile now tighter, brittle. She exchanged quick words with the men in suits, then gestured reluctantly toward the girls. Amara felt her pulse quicken. This was no longer just about a single flight. It was spiraling outward, drawing in corporate teams, legal risk, the looming shadow of her father's influence. She wanted to be brave, to stand tall like Ayanna, but her voice shook as she whispered, "What if this gets bigger than us? What if people lose their jobs? Not just her." Ayanna didn't hesitate. Then maybe they'll finally stop treating people like this. Maybe something changes. The men in suits approached. One crouched slightly to meet their eyes, his tone softer than Paula's had ever been. Amara, Ayanna, I want to apologize on behalf of Liberty Skies. There was a misapplication of policy here. We're arranging a later flight for you, in first class, and access to the lounge while you wait. Ayanna's arms folded tight. And what about the way we were treated? What about her? She flicked her eyes toward Paula. The man hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. That will be handled internally. Amara stared at him, seeing the polished politeness, the shield of corporate language. She thought of her father's words again. Covering it up isn't the same as making it right. She shook her head slowly. We're not asking for a lounge. We're asking for respect. Her words, spoken quietly, carried farther than she realized. Phones recorded. Tweets flew. The crowd shifted. And in the silence that followed, for the first time, Amara felt her own voice cut through the noise. But the fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. The aircraft that had left them behind was already somewhere over the Midwest, carrying strangers in the very seats Amara and Ayanna had been forced to surrender. From the wide windows of Gate C-23, the sisters could see other planes lining up for departure, steel wings glinting in the afternoon sun. Each one felt like a reminder that the world was moving forward without them. Amara tried to steady her breathing, but the humiliation clung like a second skin. Every time she replayed the scene, Susan's scrutiny, Tom's hesitant escort, Paula's dismissive tone, it pressed heavier on her chest. She opened her folder again, looking at the neat stack of papers, as though the forms might defend her even now. Ayanna leaned back, her arms crossed tightly. "You realize," she muttered, "some random man is sitting in my seat right now, sipping ginger ale and stretching out his legs. And we're stuck here like we don't matter." Amara gave her a weary look. "Don't. You'll just make yourself angrier." "I'm already angry," Ayanna shot back. Her voice cracked, and she lowered it quickly when she noticed people staring. "I keep thinking, if we looked different, if our skin was lighter, would they have even blinked?" The question sat between them like a truth they both knew. but couldn't soften. A group of passengers across the gate whispered loudly, debating the incident as if the girls weren't sitting within earshot. I heard the staff say minors can't sit in first class. One man offered. Another shook her head. That's not a rule. I flew with my niece last year. Same age. No problem. A third chimed in, lowering his voice. It's not about age. It's about perception. People see what they want to see. Ayanna clenched her fists, whispering, Exactly. Before Amara could answer, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't their father. It was a flood of notifications from social media. Someone had posted a TikTok clip of Paula telling them to step aside. Another clip showed Ayanna's voice, sharp and clear. You didn't just deny us a seat. You denied us dignity. The words were already circulating, being shared, being dissected. Amara pressed her palm to her forehead. It's everywhere now. Ayanna leaned in, eyes wide with a strange mix of fear and pride. Good. Let them all see. They didn't have to wait long before attention reached them in real time. A woman with a press badge hanging around her neck appeared, carrying a recorder and notebook. She crouched down near their chairs, her tone cautious but insistent. I'm with the Newark Daily. Could I ask you two a few questions about what happened? Amara froze. She remembered their father's warning. Don't engage with media. But Ayanna leaned forward, her voice sharp. Ask Paula Griffin. Ask Liberty Skies why they think two black girls don't belong in first class. The reporter scribbled furiously. And how did it make you feel? Being escorted off the plane, Amara finally found her voice. Like we were invisible. Like all the documents and tickets and preparation didn't matter. Because to them, we didn't look like we belonged. The woman nodded solemnly, thanked them, and hurried off. Within minutes, the Newark Daily's feed posted a breaking story: twin sisters removed from Liberty Skies flight despite valid first-class tickets. Allegations of racial bias surface at Newark Airport. The ripple grew wider. Screens around the terminal lit with alerts. Passengers scrolled, glancing up at the sisters, whispering more urgently now. Susan Miller stood stiffly behind the counter, her jaw tight. Tom Weaver kept adjusting his tie, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Paula, however, emerged once again, her smile sharper than ever. You girls are making this more dramatic than it needs to be, Paula said smoothly, as though addressing a minor inconvenience. Social media exaggerates everything. Best thing you can do is sit quietly until we rebook you. Ayanna shot up again, her voice ringing louder than before. We didn't ask for this. You caused this. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. A small crowd had gathered now, filming openly. One man called out, She's right. Another added, Let the kids fly. Paula's expression hardened, the mask cracking. This conversation is over. Security will be asked to intervene if necessary. Before she could turn away, one of the corporate representatives stepped forward. His voice cut through the tension. That won't be necessary. Paula, we're taking over. Paula froze, her jaw tight, but she retreated, her heels clicking angrily against the tile. Amara felt the knot in her stomach tighten. She hated the spectacle, but at the same time, something shifted in her chest. For once, it wasn't just her and Ayanna against the world. Strangers were speaking up. Phones were recording proof. Their father was moving behind the scenes. And yet, as she sat down again, she felt a tremor of dread. Every ripple had consequences. Every clip shared meant the story was leaving their hands. Ayanna noticed her silence. "Don't retreat now," she whispered. "This is bigger than us. People are finally paying attention." Amara nodded slowly, but her mind whirled. Paying attention could mean change, but it could also mean backlash, scrutiny, voices twisting their pain into arguments they couldn't control. Still, she straightened her shoulders, glancing at the growing crowd. She thought of her father's voice, calm and resolute. She thought of what he might be doing. Right now, calls, decisions, strategies forming like storm clouds. Somewhere out there, she knew, Liberty Skies was already feeling the tremors. And this was only the beginning. David Cole had always been known for his composure. In the world of aviation, where billion-dollar deals could swing on a single negotiation, he had built his reputation on steady hands and sharper instincts. But when his daughter's voices cracked through the receiver, humiliation straining every syllable, something deep inside him shifted. He stood at the window of his Manhattan office, the city skyline sprawling beneath him, his reflection faint in the glass. The board members seated around the long oak table had fallen silent after he abruptly ended their merger discussion. No one dared to interrupt. They watched as David Cole, the man who rarely raised his voice, gripped his phone like a lifeline. 2 teenage girls. He murmured, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. "My daughters." Pulled off a flight. Tickets in hand. Why his jaw tightened. Because someone didn't like the sight of them in first class. One of his senior advisors cleared his throat cautiously. "Sir, we can issue a formal statement later today." Perhaps David turned, his gaze hard. "No statements. Action." He stepped out of the room, leaving the advisors in hushed confusion. In the hallway, he dialed Richard Halston again. This time, his tone was sharper. "Richard, I need you to understand what you've unleashed. This isn't a minor customer complaint. This is a national incident waiting to explode." Halston tried to maintain calm. "David, please, let's not escalate." These situations. Escalate, David cut in. "You had your staff drag my daughters off a plane for no reason other than prejudice, thinly veiled as policy. If you think this ends with a rebooked ticket and a hollow apology, you don't understand me." Halston sighed heavily. "We can investigate. Discipline staff if necessary. But pulling agreements, threatening partnerships that would cripple operations, surely you don't intend." David's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of finality. "Then you haven't been paying attention. Liberty Skies relies on Horizon Airways for gate access at more than 24 airports. Without us, your planes don't move. Consider this your warning if my daughters aren't shown the respect they deserve. Liberty Skies won't be flying much longer." He ended the call before Halston could reply. At Newark, Amara's phone buzzed again. This time it was her father on video. She hesitated, then accepted, tilting the screen so both sisters could see. Their father's face filled the display, his expression composed, but his eyes burning. "Listen to me. You are safe. That's what matters first." He paused, studying them. "But I want you to know this won't be buried. The world is already watching, and I will not let this slide into silence." Ayanna leaned forward, her voice trembling with fury. "They treated us like criminals. They told us to leave like we didn't matter. Everyone saw." "I know," David said softly. "And that's why Liberty Skies will feel the consequences." Amara shifted uneasily. "Dad, what if it hurts people who had nothing to do with this employee's other passengers?" David's eyes softened, though his jaw remained tight. Justice always costs something, but silence costs more. I will not allow the lesson to be that you can strip dignity from my children or anyone else's and expect no reckoning." The call ended, but the weight of his words lingered. Across the country, news outlets picked up the story. The Newark Daily's report had spread like wildfire, and now larger platforms echoed it. Black teens removed from first class, airline accused of discrimination. By the hour's end, Liberty skies climbed into national trends. At gate C-23, strangers approached to whisper encouragement. A mother of 3 leaned down and told Amara, "You were brave. Don't let them make you feel small." A college student offered Ayanna a fist bump, saying, "Keep fighting. They need to hear it." But the sisters also overheard the murmurs of doubt. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. One man muttered, "Kids shouldn't travel alone anyway." Another scoffed, "First-class entitlement. People make everything about race these days." Ayanna bristled, but Amara put a hand on her arm. "Not every voice matters. Focus on the ones that do." As the tension in the terminal swelled, the corporate men returned. This time, one of them carried a phone. "Mr. Halston would like to speak with you," he said, his voice too polished. Amara and Ayanna exchanged a glance before Ayanna took the phone. Richard Halston's voice came through, rehearsed and formal. "Girls, I want to apologize personally for the confusion. Our staff may have misunderstood procedure. We'd like to make amends. Complimentary tickets, accommodations, whatever is needed." Ayanna's hand shook as she held the phone. "This isn't about free tickets," she snapped. "This is about respect. Do you even realize how humiliating that was? Do you even care?" Halston hesitated, then spoke in the same measured cadence. "I assure you, Liberty Skies takes these matters seriously. We value all our passengers equally." Amara's patience snapped. She took the phone from her sister, her voice quiet but cutting. "If you valued us equally, we'd still be on that plane." For the first time, Halston had no immediate reply. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "We will investigate. That's all I can promise at this moment." The corporate man took the phone back, ending the call. Around them, the passengers who had listened in muttered disapproval. One woman shook her head. Empty words. Ayanna looked at her sister. Dad's right. They'll only change if they're forced to." Amara swallowed hard. She wanted to believe in reform, in dialogue, in reason. But every moment since they'd been pulled from that seat told her otherwise. And as the afternoon light slanted across the terminal, painting the floor in gold and shadow, the reality settled over her like a storm cloud. They weren't just 2 girls trying to get to a conference anymore. They were symbols, willing or not, in a fight much larger than themselves. Somewhere in Manhattan, her father was pulling levers that could cripple an airline. Somewhere in Liberty Skies headquarters, executives scrambled to contain a crisis that was only beginning. And here at Gate C-23, Amara and Ayanna sat with their backpacks, their boarding passes still in hand, and the gnawing truth that their lives had already changed. By early evening, the story had outgrown the terminal. What began as a shaky livestream by a travel vlogger had cascaded into every corner of the internet. Clips of Amara and Ayanna being escorted off the plane looped endlessly on social media, overlaid with captions that stung with accusation. Would this happen if they weren't? Black cable news anchors debated the footage with practiced solemnity. Commentators clashed over whether Liberty Skies was guilty of racial bias or a procedural error. Hashtags multiplied, each sharper than the last. Grounded for being black. Let them board. Liberty or nothing. In the airport lounge. Amara scrolled through her phone, her thumb trembling as she skimmed through the sea of comments. Thousands of strangers were defending them, sharing stories of their own humiliations while traveling. A woman wrote, "My teenage son was treated the same way in Dallas last year. Thank you for shining a light." Another said, "Seeing those girls stand up with such dignity makes me proud. But it also makes me sick at how far we have to go." But mixed in were the darker threads. Spoiled brats with a rich daddy pulling strings, playing the race card for clout. If they can't handle it, stay and coach. Ayanna clenched her jaw as she read some of them over her sister's shoulder. "They don't even know us. They don't know how hard Dad worked for every inch of what we have." Amara put a hand on her sister's arm. "Let them talk. The truth's out there. That's enough." Yet inside, her stomach churned. The truth didn't always win in the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, David Cole was already reshaping the battlefield. His legal team had drafted a preliminary notice to the Department of Transportation, alleging discriminatory practices by Liberty Skies. His communications director, a sharp-eyed woman named Elise Harper, leaned over his desk with a tablet. "It's everywhere," she said, scrolling. CNN, MSNBC. Even Fox picked it up. "They're all running segments tonight. If you want to control the narrative, now's the time." David shook his head. "Not yet. Let them flounder. Every word they stumble over will make our case stronger. Once they issue their weak apology, then we strike." Elise hesitated. "Sir, you're not just a father in this. You're the CEO of Horizon. Whatever you say carries industry weight." "I'm both," David replied firmly, "and in this moment, I refuse to separate them." At Newark, the twins sat in the sterile calm of the Liberty Skies lounge. Despite plush chairs and soft lighting, neither could shake the weight of eyes on them. Passengers whispered, some offering sympathetic smiles, others glancing away quickly. The air was thick with a kind of nervous recognition. A young flight attendant approached hesitantly, her badge reading Renee. "I just wanted to say," she stammered, "I saw what happened earlier. That shouldn't have happened to you. It's not how most of us are taught to treat passengers. Please believe that." Ayanna's eyes softened slightly, though her voice still carried steel. "Then why did it happen?" Renee swallowed. "Because some people still see what they want to see, and because too many of us stay quiet." She lowered her voice. "I won't anymore." With a small nod, she walked away, leaving the twins with a flicker of unexpected hope. Just as they began to settle, Amara's phone vibrated with an alert. She opened it and gasped. "Ayanna, look, Dad's trending. The Apex ultimatum." On screen was a headline from the New York Times. Horizon Airways CEO threatens to revoke Liberty Skies gate access after discrimination incident. Ayanna blinked. "He actually said that." "Apparently so," Amara whispered. She read aloud from the article. "David Cole, CEO of Horizon Airways, is reportedly considering the withdrawal of Liberty Skies gate-sharing agreements in multiple airports. Analysts say such a move could cost Liberty Skies millions in lost revenue and passenger disruption." Passengers nearby began murmuring louder, some pulling out their phones to confirm. The lounge buzzed with shock. "If Horizon pulls out, Liberty's finished," one man muttered. "That airline survives on those partnerships." The weight of it hit Amara like a wave. Their father hadn't just made a phone call. He had detonated a bomb beneath the foundation of an entire company. Ayanna's chest swelled with pride. Good. Let them feel what it's like to be powerless for once. But Amara hesitated. And what about the innocent ones? The flight attendants like Renee, the baggage handlers, the ticket desk staff. They'll suffer too. Ayanna turned to her sister, fire in her eyes. And what about us? What about every black kid humiliated at an airport? Are we supposed to keep quiet so no one loses their job? Sometimes justice hurts. Amara bit her lip, her mind a whirl of doubt and determination. Both voices were true. Both voices tore at her. Back in the boardroom of Liberty Sky's headquarters, panic reigned. Executives crowded around a speakerphone as Halston's voice carried over from his office. Damage control. People. I need options. One VP suggested, issue a stronger apology. Emphasize family values. Emphasize respect. Another shook his head. That won't cut it. Cole's already got the upper hand. If Horizon actually pulls gate access, we're crippled. A third offered, negotiate. Offer to partner on diversity initiatives. Make him part of the solution. Halston groaned. He doesn't want to partner. He wants blood. And if he keeps pushing, we'll be bleeding out by morning. As the executives argued, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't just a customer service issue anymore. This was an existential crisis. At Newark, Amara and Ayanna were escorted discreetly to a new gate for a later flight. As they walked, cameras flashed from across the terminal. Reporters shouted questions. Do you believe Liberty Skies is racist? Are you standing with your father's decision to cripple the airline? The girls kept their heads down, guided by security. But inside, both trembled at the weight of the moment. In the waiting area, Ayanna leaned close to her sister. This is bigger than us now. Way bigger. Amara nodded, her voice low. And once Dad makes his move, nothing will ever be the same. The intercom announced boarding for their new flight, but the words barely registered. For the first time, both girls realized they weren't just passengers anymore. They were Symbol's two teenage faces, now carrying the weight of justice, of anger, of change. And as the plane taxied into the night sky, their father prepared to pull the lever that would send shockwaves through the entire airline industry. The morning after the incident, Liberty Sky's corporate tower in Chicago was a fortress of unease. The sleek glass lobby, usually buzzing with executives clutching coffee cups and laptops, was unnervingly still. In the executive conference room, blinds were drawn tight, and a dozen senior leaders sat rigidly, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and dread. Richard Halston stood at the head of the table, his tie loosened, his face pale. He hadn't slept. We're already bleeding, he said, voice rough. Cole's threat is front-page news. Our stock dropped 8% overnight. Investors are calling, demanding to know if Horizon's pulling the plug. If we lose those gates, we lose our lifeline. A silence followed, broken only by the nervous shuffle of papers. Finally, Sarah Yates, the head of operations, leaned forward. Richard, we need to admit what happened. Pretending this was a misunderstanding isn't working. That live stream shows exactly what it was. Two black teenagers being treated as though they didn't belong in first class. People see it. They feel it. Denial is suicide. Another executive, Mark Breen, slammed his palm on the table. Admit it. That opens us to lawsuits, to federal penalties. We can't hand Cole ammunition, Sarah shot back. We've already handed it to him. Every second we wait, he gets stronger. This isn't about Cole anymore. It's about every person watching that video and recognizing their own humiliation in it. Halston pinched the bridge of his nose. He knew Sarah was right. The memo from Rogers, the one that had leaked overnight, was damning. His words had reduced Amara and Ayanna to caricature suspicious behavior, Too polished for minors. First-class tickets inconsistent with profile. It wasn't just bias. It was written prejudice. Halston knew Rogers would have to go. But firing one man wouldn't erase the rot that was now on display. Meanwhile, in New York, David Cole sat with Elise Harper and his legal counsel in Horizon's headquarters. His daughters had arrived home late the night before, their faces tired but resolute. He'd hugged them longer than usual, holding on as though he could shield them from every ugly headline. Now, sitting at the polished walnut table, he was all business. "I want 3 paths on the table," he said. "Legal, financial, and public narrative. Legal Doughty complaint, civil rights investigation, financial immediate suspension of gate agreements, narrative control the story before Liberty spins it." Elise scrolled through her tablet. The internet already named it the apex ultimatum. That phrase is everywhere. If you lean into it, you become the man who drew a line in the sand. If you resist it, people will accuse you of posturing. David considered her words. He hadn't chosen the phrase, but it had power. It captured the essence of what he intended, not a tantrum, but a reckoning. "Then we let it stand," he said quietly. "The ultimatum stays." Back in Newark, Amara and Ayanna sat at their breakfast table, scrolling through their phones while their mother, Lorraine, set down plates of eggs and toast. She tried to keep her voice even. "You girls need to stay grounded. Don't read every comment. It will eat you alive." Amara looked up, her eyes heavy. "Mom, it's not just comments. It's people's stories. They're writing to us, saying, 'This happened to me, too.' It's overwhelming." Ayanna jabbed her fork into her eggs. "It means we can't back down. This isn't just about us anymore." Lorraine sighed. She admired her daughter's fire, but she feared the burden was too much. "Just remember," she said softly, "you're still teenagers. The world is going to try to make you symbols. Don't let it steal your humanity." Later that afternoon, a press conference was hastily assembled at Liberty Sky's headquarters. Cameras filled the small auditorium, reporters buzzing with anticipation. Halston stepped to the podium, his expression controlled but uneasy. "Yesterday," he began, "2 of our passengers, Amara and Ayanna Cole, experienced treatment at Newark Liberty International Airport that was inconsistent with the values of Liberty Skies. We deeply regret the incident. Effective immediately. The staff involved have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. We are reviewing our protocols for unaccompanied minors to ensure this never happens again." Reporters erupted with questions. Is Liberty Skies admitting racial discrimination played a role? Halston stiffened. "We are investigating all aspects. Has Rogers been terminated?" "We don't discuss personnel matters publicly," he replied, though everyone knew what the memo had revealed. The press conference was live-streamed at Horizon's headquarters. David watched in silence, his daughters sitting beside him. Ayanna's fists clenched. He can't even say the word. Racism. He can't say it. Amara's voice was quieter, but sharper. Because if he does, the lawsuits bury them. David exhaled slowly. "That's why our fight has to continue. Their words mean nothing without accountability." That evening, news outlets played the press conference on repeat. Commentators dissected Halston's every phrase. Some called it a step forward, others called it cowardice. And under every segment, the footage of Amara and Ayanna being ushered off the plane played again and again, a haunting reminder. But the real turning point came when another video surfaced. A passenger from the original flight uploaded his recording from inside the cabin. It showed Paula Griffin whispering to Jonah, smirking as she gestured at the twin seats. Her words, though muffled, were clear enough. "They don't belong here. Not in first class." The internet erupted. The clip was undeniable. Not policy, not misunderstanding. Prejudice, laid bare. Ayanna threw her phone onto the couch in disgust. There it is. Proof. And they still won't say it. Amara picked it up, her face pale. They can't hide from this anymore. Not now. Within hours, Liberty Skies was in full meltdown. Employees flooded internal forums with outrage, demanding reforms. Former staff went on record with stories of similar discrimination. Lawsuits were filed. The FAA announced a preliminary inquiry, and in the Cole household, David knew the moment had arrived. He gathered his daughters and Lorraine in the living room. The television flickered with images of Liberty's crumbling facade. This is what accountability looks like when the world refuses to look away, he told them. But now we need to decide, how far do we push? Do we bring Liberty Skies to its knees? Or do we use this moment to force them to change? Ayanna's answer was immediate. Burn them to the ground. Amara's voice was softer, uncertain. But what about the workers who had nothing to do with it? The families who depend on those jobs? David looked between his daughters, his heart heavy. They were mirrors of his own internal war justice demanding fire, compassion urging restraint. And as he stared into their faces, he realized the hardest part of leadership was not knowing which truth to choose. The leaked video of Paula Griffin spread with the speed of wildfire. By dawn, it had reached millions of views across multiple platforms, igniting anger far beyond the usual churn of online outrage. National news networks looped her smirk and words like a damning refrain. They don't belong here, not in first class. Everywhere the Coles looked phones, TVs, even the digital billboards in Times Square. The story loomed large. Amara and Ayanna's faces appeared alongside headlines. Teen twins expose airline bias at Horizon's Manhattan headquarters. David Cole stood before a wall of screens as Lise Harper briefed him on the fallout. Liberty stock has fallen another 12% overnight. Unions are threatening work stoppages unless Griffin and her supervisors are fired. Politicians are weighing in, Senator Ramirez tweeted. If two teenage girls can be stripped of dignity in first class, no American is safe from discrimination in travel. David rubbed his temples. He'd seen companies stumble before, but rarely had he seen one unravel this quickly. And Halston, he asked. Elise smirked faintly. He's cornered. Half his board wants him to negotiate with you. The other half wants to dig in and wait it out. Either way, he's paralyzed. David's phone buzzed. It was Lorraine. He excused himself, stepping into his office. How are the girls? He asked immediately. They didn't go to school today, she admitted. Every classmate has an opinion. Half want selfies. The other half whisper things they've read online. Amara's trying to stay calm, but Ayanna's furious. She says she feels like the whole world's dissecting her life. David's heart ached. He had wanted to protect them, but instead, his choices had amplified the spotlight. Tell them it won't be forever, that I'm fighting so no other child will endure this. Lorraine's voice softened. Just don't forget they're children now, not soldiers in your war. David leaned against his desk, her words cutting deep. She was right, but how could he stop, now that the world was demanding action? Across the river in Newark, Amara scrolled through a torrent of new messages. Strangers wrote heartfelt letters. You reminded me of my own daughter. I was kicked off a flight too, but I didn't have a father who could fight back. One man wrote, "I wish someone had stood for me when I was 15. Maybe I wouldn't still carry the shame." The weight of their voices pressed heavily on her chest. She looked at her sister. "Ayanna, this isn't just about us anymore. People are depending on us to keep pushing." Ayanna's eyes burned. "And we will, but we're not the ones with the power to crush them. Dad is. He has to finish this." At Liberty Sky's headquarters, chaos reigned. The board gathered in emergency session, each member shouting over the other. "This is untenable," Sarah Yates said sharply. "The video confirms bias. We need to cut Griffin loose, fire Rogers, and beg Cole to come to the table." Mark Breen slammed his fist. "If we admit fault, the lawsuits will bury us. Class actions, shareholder revolts will be finished." Helston, red-eyed and exhausted, raised his hands. "We're already finished if Horizon pulls our gates. The choice isn't survival or liability. It's which death we prefer." Silence fell. No one dared argue. Meanwhile, David met privately with two of his closest advisors, men who had stood beside him through decades of industry battles. One, Raymond Hughes, leaned in. "If you cripple liberty, you'll send a message to the entire industry. They'll fear you, and they'll change." The other, Evelyn Porter, frowned. "But at what cost? Thousands of employees, most innocent, will lose jobs. Airports will face chaos. You'll look less like a reformer and more like a tyrant." David listened, torn. He could see both truths. "So what do I do? Spare liberty and risk sending the message that bias only gets a slap on the wrist, or crush them and risk collateral damage I can't undo?" Evelyn held his gaze. "You ask yourself who you want your daughters to see when this is over, a man who wielded power like a hammer, or a man who shaped it into something greater." That night, Amara lay awake, her mind restless. She remembered Paula's smirk, the sting of being marched off the plane, the eyes of strangers judging her worth. She wanted justice, desperately, yet she also saw the baggage handler smiling at them weeks ago when they flew to Atlanta, the kind pilot who had given them each a pair of wings. Not everyone at Liberty was Paula. She whispered into the dark, "What if hurting them all makes us no better?" Ayanna, awake in the next bed, rolled over. "Don't start doubting. Amara, if we don't fight to the end, they'll win." But what if fighting to the end means destroying more than we fix? Ayanna had no answer. She turned away, staring into the shadows, her silence heavier than any argument. By morning, the world woke to breaking news. Horizon Airways had suspended 3 of its gate-sharing contracts with Liberty Skies, effective immediately. Flights were canceled across the country. Chaos rippled through airports as passengers scrambled for alternatives. At Newark, stranded travelers cursed Liberty Skies. Some directed their anger at the airline. Others muttered about the Coles. "Those kids and their father are punishing all of us." One man spat. Ayanna stiffened when she overheard. "See? They blame us, not the airline." Amara squeezed her hand. "We can't control everyone's anger, but we can control what we stand for." In Chicago, Halston watched the cancellations pile up on his monitor. "He's pulling us apart piece by piece," he muttered. A young assistant hesitated before speaking. "Sir, should I draft your resignation letter?" Halston closed his eyes. He had no answer. And in Manhattan, David Cole sat once more at his office window, staring at the city that had made him and hardened him. His daughters' faces lingered in his mind, their pain, their fire, their innocence. The storm he had unleashed was no longer just about them. It was about an entire system weighed down by prejudice and silence. But storms did not discriminate. They swept away the guilty and the innocent alike. And for the first time, David wondered whether he had already crossed the line between justice and vengeance. The day after Horizon suspended the contracts, the airports looked like battlegrounds of confusion. Screens flickered with the word "canceled" in bold red letters. Families sat huddled on the floor. Luggage sprawled around them. Business travelers barked into their phones, demanding reroutes. News cameras prowled terminals, capturing the human toll of an airline caught in crisis. At Newark, Amara and Ayanna walked through the concourse with their mother. Oh, they weren't traveling anywhere, just accompanying Lorraine to meet a family friend. But everywhere they went, eyes followed. Some people offered sympathetic nods, hushed "God bless you" as they passed. Others glared, muttering just loud enough to be heard, "There's the reason my flight's grounded." Ayanna's spine stiffened with every stare. "They act like we canceled the flights ourselves," she hissed. Amara tried to calm her. "We didn't. Liberty did this to themselves. Dad's just showing them the cost." "But people don't see it that way," Ayanna said bitterly. "They just see two girls who made their lives harder." Lorraine looped her arms around both daughters, pulling them close as they walked. "Don't carry strangers' bitterness. Carry your truth. That's enough." In Manhattan, David Cole sat across from Evelyn Porter and Raymond Hughes in the boardroom. Elise Harper hovered near the screens, monitoring every headline. Raymond leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "David, you've got them gasping. Their stock's down 18% in 48 hours. Halston can't withstand another week of this pressure. Push harder. Revoke more gates. Break them." Evelyn shook her head sharply. "And strand tens of thousands more passengers. Do you want the public to turn on you instead? You'll hand Liberty a weapon if you look ruthless." David steepled his fingers, silent. Both advisors were right in different ways. He thought of Amara's doubts, of Ayanna's fire, of Lorraine's plea to remember their humanity. He carried them all like stones in his chest. Elise interrupted softly. "There's another development. Civil rights organizations are demanding meetings with you. They want you to lead a coalition, not just against liberty, but against discriminatory practices in all of aviation." David's brow furrowed. "A coalition." She nodded. "They see you as more than a CEO. They see you as a figurehead. If you take the role, you shift from avenger to reformer. If you refuse, they'll still march, but without you steering the course." The weight of legacy pressed on him. He hadn't sought to be a movement leader, but sometimes leadership chose you, whether you wanted it or not. Meanwhile, at Liberty Sky's headquarters, Halston faced a mutiny. The boardroom buzzed with tension as Sarah Yates laid out grim numbers. Bookings are down 30%. Call centers are overwhelmed. If we don't stop the bleeding, Chapter 11 is a matter of months, Mark Breen snapped. Thanks to Cole's crusade, we should sue him for tortious interference. Sarah scoffed. Sue him. He's holding the receipts. Every video, every memo, every policy that shows bias. We wouldn't just lose, we'd be gutted in discovery. Halston raised a hand. Enough. We don't sue Cole. We don't antagonize him. We find a way to bring him to the table. Mark sneered. He doesn't want the table. He wants our heads on it. Sarah leaned in, her voice low and steady. Then we give him something bigger than heads. We give him systemic reform. And maybe, just maybe, we survive. Back in Newark, Amara sat at her desk, drafting a journal entry she never intended to share. Everyone calls me brave, but I don't feel brave. I feel like a girl who wanted to go to a conference and ended up dragging an entire airline into the fire. I don't know if I should feel proud or guilty. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Ayanna barged into her room, waving her phone. Look, Nyaur, stand with. The Coles is trending. Thousands of people are posting stories. It's not just us anymore. Amara, it's everyone who's ever been told they didn't belong. Amara glanced at the screen, her chest tightening. It was true. Videos and testimonials poured in. A black mother describing being asked to prove her ticket 3 times. A Latino family pulled aside for extra screening. An Asian man seated in the back despite paying for business class. Each story a thread woven into the same tapestry. Ayanna's eyes shone. Don't you see? We lit the spark. Now it's a fire, Amara whispered, almost to herself. But fire burns everything in its path. The next morning, Liberty Skies made its most desperate move yet. Halston himself called David Cole. His voice was tired, almost pleading. David, I know you have no reason to trust me, but if this continues, it won't just be Liberty that suffers. Airports will suffer. Travelers, families, innocent workers. I'm asking not as CEO to CEO, but as one father to another meet me. Let's talk. David was silent for a long moment. Then he said, You want to meet, fine. But understand this, I'm not coming to negotiate for comfort. I'm coming to demand change. Halston exhaled shakily. Then let's at least start there. When David hung up, he looked out the window of his office at the city pulsing beneath him. For the first time, he felt the faint stirrings of a different path, a path not of total annihilation, but of reshaping the system from within. Yet he knew one thing for certain, whether Liberty survived or crumbled. The world had already changed. That night, Amara and Ayanna sat on their balcony, the city lights blinking like stars. Ayanna's voice was fierce, determined. Dad's going to finish this. I can feel it. Amara looked out over the skyline, her voice softer, almost fragile. I just hope when he does, we'll still recognize him. The suite in a midtown Manhattan hotel had been stripped of all luxury, transformed into a neutral ground for confrontation. The curtains were drawn, the room sterile, guarded by a handful of security on both sides. Cameras were banned. Only a stenographer sat quietly in the corner, documenting every word. David Cole entered first, his presence filling the room before he spoke. His dark suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable. Amara and Ayanna had begged to accompany him, but Lorraine had persuaded them to stay home. This is a battle fought with words, not with wounds. She'd told them. Minutes later, Richard Halston stepped in. He looked smaller than he had on television, his shoulders sagging under weeks of crisis. He extended his hand, but David only inclined his head slightly before sitting. Halston cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, thank you for meeting me. I know there's animosity, but I believe we can find a way forward. David's eyes sharpened. Animosity implies this is personal. It isn't. This is systemic. And systemic rot doesn't get solved with polite apologies. Halston flinched but pressed on. We've already suspended the staff. We're reviewing training protocols. We're willing to implement oversight. David cut him off. You still haven't said the word. Halston blinked. The word racism, David said, his voice steady but cold. Say it, because until you acknowledge the truth, everything else is window dressing. The silence was heavy, broken only by the scribble of the stenographer's pen. Halston shifted uncomfortably, his lips parting and closing again. Finally, he forced it out. Yes, racism was a factor. Our staff acted with bias, and it cannot be excused. For the first time, David leaned back. Considering him, it wasn't contrition he saw in Halston's eyes, it was survival. But survival could still be leveraged. Then here are my terms, David said firmly. 1, public acknowledgement of discrimination, not just in this incident, but as a systemic problem within your company. 2, immediate termination of Paula Griffin and Rogers, and suspension of the supervisors who enabled them. 3, the establishment of an independent oversight board in partnership with civil rights organizations, with authority to investigate complaints without interference. 4, mandatory equity and bias training for all staff, not as a checkbox, but as an ongoing certification. And 5, financial restitution, not to my family, but to create a fund for passengers harmed by discriminatory practices in aviation. Halston's mouth opened in protest, but David raised a hand. If even one of these is ignored, Horizon severs all remaining ties, and Liberty Skies collapses. You know I have that power. Don't pretend otherwise. Halston's face paled. He glanced at the stenographer, then back at David. Do you understand what you're asking? This isn't reform. It's rebuilding an entire culture from the ground up. David's gaze didn't waver. Exactly. For a long moment, Halston said nothing. He looked like a man staring at the ruins of his empire, weighing whether it was worth salvaging. Finally, he nodded, though his voice trembled. If it's survival or destruction, then I choose survival. But the board will fight me every step of the way. Then you fight harder, David replied. As the meeting ended, Halston reached for his hand again. This time, David accepted, but his grip was steel. It wasn't friendship. It was a contract of necessity. That evening, David returned home. Lorraine met him at the door, searching his face for answers. How did it go? They bent, David said simply. Now we see if they break. Amara and Ayanna rushed in from the living room, their eyes wide. Ayanna demanded, Did you make him pay? David crouched so he was eye level with them both. I made him admit the truth, and I set conditions that will force them to change or collapse. But listen to me. This fight isn't about revenge. It's about making sure what happened to you never happens again. Amara's chest swelled with relief, but Ayanna frowned. What if they fake it? What if they just do the bare minimum? David looked at her with quiet pride. Then we hold them accountable again and again, until they learn that accountability doesn't vanish with time. The next morning, Liberty Skies held its most painful press conference yet. This time, Halston didn't hide behind vague phrasing. Cameras rolled as he said, Our company has failed. 2 young passengers were humiliated not because of policy, but because of racism. That word must be spoken. We take full responsibility, effective immediately. The employees involved are terminated, and we are partnering with independent organizations to rebuild trust. The reaction was seismic. Some praised the admission as overdue honesty. Others dismissed it as too little, too late. Shareholders screamed. Civil rights leaders cautiously welcomed the shift, vowing to monitor every promise. Amara and Ayanna watched the broadcast in silence. Ayanna finally whispered, He said it. He actually said it. Amara nodded slowly, tears stinging her eyes. And now the world knows it wasn't just us imagining things. It was real. It happened, and they had to admit it. That night, messages poured in, from strangers, from allies, from communities that had carried invisible scars for years. One read, Because of you, my children might walk onto a plane tomorrow with their heads held higher. Another, You reminded me I wasn't crazy when I felt those looks, those whispers. You gave my pain a name." Amara closed her phone and looked at her sister. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt something close to peace. And in his study, David Cole poured himself a glass of water, staring out at the city lights. He knew this wasn't the end. Reform never came in one stroke. But tonight, for his daughters, for the people who had written their hearts into emails and tweets, for every unseen traveler who had swallowed humiliation in silence, it was a beginning. The days following the press conference were nothing short of chaotic. News outlets dissected every syllable of Richard Halston's admission. Late-night hosts cracked sharp jokes about Liberty Sky's collapse into humility, and civil rights advocates seized the moment to call for broader reform across the entire airline industry. For once, the conversation wasn't buried on the margins. It was front page, prime time, inescapable. At the Cole household, the mood was cautious. Amara scrolled through articles on her tablet, reading out loud. They're calling it the Cole effect. Some say Dad's demands will reshape corporate America's handling of bias complaints. Ayanna, perched on the arm of the sofa, snorted. Or they'll just copy Liberty Sky's press release and keep doing the same old thing. David, seated nearby with his sleeves rolled up, offered a tired smile. Skepticism is healthy. It keeps people accountable. But never underestimate the power of precedent. Once one giant bends, others feel the tremor. Lorraine brought in a tray of tea and set it down, her eyes softening as she looked at him. But tremors can unsettle innocent people, too. Are you prepared for that backlash? David's silence spoke louder than words. He knew layoffs were looming, not just for guilty managers, but for ground staff, pilots, crew who had never raised their voices in hate. It was the collateral damage he'd feared, yet accepted as the price of leverage. That weekend, the family attended a community forum at a Newark church. The room was crowded, the air thick with both anger and hope. Families spoke of humiliations they'd endured while flying, being pulled aside for extra checks, ignored by attendants, questioned about their ability to afford their seats. One older man lifted his trembling hand and said, "For years, I thought it was just me, that maybe I was being too sensitive. But seeing those girls on the news, I realized it wasn't me. It was them." Amara felt tears prick her eyes. Ayanna squeezed her hand tightly. They weren't alone anymore. David took the microphone near the end of the forum. He didn't deliver a polished CEO speech. His voice was quiet, raw. "I'm not here as an executive tonight. I'm here as a father. What happened to my daughters was humiliating, but it wasn't unique. And that truth should outrage us. We cannot allow corporate convenience to outweigh human dignity. But we also must channel our pain into building, not just tearing down. Reforms must outlive outrage." The audience stood in thunderous applause. Some shouted their thanks. Others wept openly. Lorraine, standing off to the side, placed a hand over her heart. For all the battles still ahead, she saw the flicker of healing ignite in the room. Meanwhile, in Liberty Sky's headquarters, the ripple effects were less hopeful. Halston faced a fractured board, some furious he had conceded to David's terms. Sarah Yates, the most vocal, declared, "You've handed him the company keys. What's next?" "He demands our roots," Halston, visibly worn down, replied. "What's next is survival. We either adapt or collapse entirely. Do you prefer bankruptcy?" The silence that followed was bitter. Some directors resigned, unwilling to align themselves with the company's mea culpa. Others stayed, calculating that reinvention was cheaper than ruin. Outside corporate boardrooms, Passengers were voting with their wallets. Online, hashtags like Fly with Dignity and Cole Effect spread rapidly. Bookings at Liberty Skies plummeted, while competitors scrambled to release their own anti-bias initiatives. Some were genuine. Others were nothing more than slick marketing campaigns. The scrutiny was brutal. For Amara and Ayanna, life at school shifted dramatically. Friends treated them like celebrities. Teachers asked them to speak at assemblies about leadership. Even strangers approached them in grocery stores, thanking them for standing up. At first, the attention was intoxicating, but soon it became overwhelming. One evening, Amara confessed to her father, "I didn't ask for this spotlight. I just wanted to go to Los Angeles and be normal." David cupped her cheek gently. "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes history chooses us, even when we don't choose it. What matters is how you carry it with grace, with truth." Ayanna, listening nearby, muttered, "Grace is overrated. Sometimes you need fire." David chuckled softly, "And sometimes you need both. That's why there are two of you." The girls laughed, but the truth lingered. They were becoming symbols, whether they wanted to or not. Weeks later, Liberty Skies unveiled its Integrity in Flight initiative. At a press conference, Halston stood flanked by leaders from civil rights organizations, outlining reforms nearly identical to David's terms: independent oversight boards, mandatory certifications, restitution funds, all announced with solemn promises. Reporters pressed him. "Is this genuine or just damage control?" Halston, sweat glistening under the lights, replied, "We are choosing to change because it is the only path forward. Judge us by our actions, not our words." David watched from his office, arms folded. Elise Harper, his strategist, leaned against the wall. "Do you believe him?" she asked. "No," David admitted. "But belief doesn't matter. Infrastructure does. If the structures are strong, individuals can't undo them easily." Elise nodded approvingly. "Then we make sure those structures hold." The true test came when another incident surfaced a month later, not at Liberty Skies, but at a different airline. A black family was told their stroller was too large despite other passengers boarding with identical equipment. This time, the backlash was immediate and amplified. Activists, journalists, and everyday travelers cited the Cole effect, demanding accountability. Within days, the airline apologized and revised its policies. Amara read the story aloud at dinner. "Dad, it's working. People aren't staying silent anymore." David's eyes softened as he looked at his daughters. "It's only the beginning. Change is slow, and it always comes with resistance. But yes, something has shifted, and you two were the spark." That night, long after the girls had gone to bed, David stood by the window, gazing at the city skyline. Lorraine joined him quietly. "You've carried so much weight," she whispered. David exhaled, the burden heavy but not unbearable. "I think about all the people who will never know our names, but will feel the difference in small ways: a smoother boarding, a kinder attendant, a dignity preserved. That's worth the fight." Lorraine slipped her hand into his. "And maybe one day, Amara and Ayanna will board a plane without the world watching, and they'll just be what they are, two brilliant girls chasing their dreams." David smiled faintly. "That's the future I want for them. Not attention, just freedom." As spring rolled in, the Cole family began reclaiming fragments of normalcy. But beneath the ordinary rhythms, school, work, family dinners was an undercurrent of transformation. They had rattled an industry. They had forced a conversation that could no longer be ignored. And though David knew the storm wasn't over, He also knew this truth when injustice is dragged into the light. It loses some of its power. The rest is persistence. The seasons shifted, and with them, the intensity of headlines. What had once been a storm that consumed every broadcast slowly transformed into a steady current of dialogue, woven into policy meetings, corporate trainings, and dinner table debates. The Cole family's ordeal no longer dominated the top of the news cycle, but its impact lingered, shaping conversations in ways both subtle and profound. At Horizon Tower, David's office had become a quiet command center for ongoing change. Reports from Liberty Sky's Oversight Board crossed his desk weekly. The early findings were encouraging. Complaints were being addressed more swiftly. Disciplinary action was no longer buried under bureaucracy, and employees were speaking up without fear of retaliation. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was progress. Elise Harper entered one morning with a folder tucked under her arm. "The latest numbers," she said, sliding it across his desk. "Passenger trust is climbing, not sky high, but steady. And interestingly, other airlines are preemptively adopting similar oversight models, even without public scandals forcing their hand." David flipped through the graphs, his expression thoughtful. That's the ripple we hoped for. Quiet imitation can sometimes be the loudest proof of influence. Elise smiled faintly. "You've changed the conversation, David. Whether they love you or resent you, they can't ignore you." But David's mind wasn't on industry statistics alone. At home, Amara and Ayanna were navigating their own transformations. Invitations to speak at youth conferences, civil rights panels, even national television interviews poured in. At first, the twins resisted. "We're just kids," Amara would protest. "Why does everyone expect us to be activists?" Ayanna, more fiery, countered. "Maybe because we're not just kids anymore. We know what it feels like to be stripped of dignity in front of strangers. If our voices can stop that for someone else, maybe it's worth it." Their father listened, guiding gently but never pushing. "You don't owe the world your voices," he reminded them. "But if you choose to use them, make sure it's on your terms, not theirs." Eventually, the girls found balance. Amara agreed to speak at her school's assembly, her words trembling at first, but growing steadier as she described the day they were removed from the plane. "It wasn't just about us," she told her classmates. "It was about everyone who has ever been told they don't belong in a space they earned. That's why we stood up and why we'll keep standing." The room erupted in applause, and Amara realized she didn't need to be an activist in the traditional sense. She just needed to speak her truth. Ayanna, meanwhile, thrived in the spotlight at a youth leadership forum in Washington, D.C. She stood before hundreds of teenagers and declared, "Anger isn't the enemy. Silence is. When we stay silent, nothing changes. When we speak, even if our voices shake, we shift the ground beneath us." Her boldness drew admiration, but also scrutiny. Some critics online dismissed her as too young to understand, while others labeled the sisters privileged kids using their father's power. The criticism stung, but David encouraged them to see beyond it. "Voices that shake the world will always attract doubt," he said. "What matters is that you know your intent. The rest is noise." Meanwhile, Liberty Skies underwent its painful metamorphosis. Rogers's dismissal sparked lawsuits, with former employees revealing long-hidden stories of bias. Paula Griffin attempted to sue for wrongful termination, but her history of complaints made her case weak. The company poured millions into retraining, restructuring, and marketing campaigns to rebuild trust. Shareholders remained wary, but passengers began trickling back, drawn by both curiosity and a cautious hope that perhaps flying could feel different. The Cole family continued to live their lives amid the turbulence. Lorraine often reminded them to hold on to ordinary moments, Sunday dinners, walks through the park, evenings curled up with books. "If we let this fight consume every corner of our lives," she told David one night, "then we've lost something precious, even in victory." He nodded, grateful for her grounding wisdom. One particularly poignant evening came, when the family gathered at Newark Airport not for a protest or meeting, but for a simple family trip. As they approached the gate, Amara's stomach knotted with memories. Ayanna's jaw clenched, ready for confrontation. But this time, the staff greeted them warmly, their names called with respect, their presence acknowledged without suspicion. A black flight attendant knelt by their seats in first class and whispered, "Your story gave me courage to speak up at work. Thank you." Amara blinked back tears, realizing the ripple effect wasn't abstract. It was here, in the quiet gratitude of strangers. The flight itself was uneventful smooth skies, friendly service, no incidents. And yet, for the Coles, it was monumental. It was proof that change, while fragile, was possible. Months later, David was invited to deliver a keynote at a national summit on corporate responsibility. He stood before a sea of executives, policymakers, and activists. His voice was steady, but laced with urgency. "The lesson of Liberty Skies isn't just about airlines," he said. "It's about every institution that believes dignity is negotiable. My daughters were denied their seats because someone decided they didn't belong in the space they had earned. How many other spaces, boardrooms, classrooms, neighborhoods are people quietly denied? Every day, accountability cannot stop at crisis. It must be a culture, a daily practice, because equality without enforcement is just a promise waiting to be broken." The speech went viral, not because it was fiery, but because it was deeply human. Clips of David saying, "Dignity is not an upgrade, it's a right," spread across social media, sparking debates in households and offices alike. Back home, Amara and Ayanna watched the recording together. Amara whispered, "That's our dad." Ayanna grinned. "Yeah, the guy who scared an entire airline into changing." But David himself resisted being cast as a hero. In a late-night conversation with Lorraine, he admitted, "Sometimes I wonder if I went too far. If the livelihoods lost outweigh the justice gained." She touched his hand gently. "Justice always feels heavy, David. But look at our girls. Look at the families who write to us. You didn't just fight for them, you fought with them. And that makes all the difference." Spring turned to summer, and the Cole family found themselves not in the eye of a storm, but at the edge of a new horizon. The girls prepared for another youth leadership program, this time without fear clouding their excitement. Lorraine began drafting a memoir about resilience and motherhood. David quietly mentored young executives of color, guiding them through challenges he had once faced alone. The saga of that one humiliating morning at the airport had grown into something larger than any of them could have imagined. It had become a story about power and responsibility, about pain and transformation, about the delicate balance between holding institutions accountable and holding on to one's humanity. On the eve of their next trip, as Amara and Ayanna packed side by side, Ayanna paused and said softly, "Do you think we'll ever just be two girls going on a trip? Nothing more?" Amara smiled thoughtfully. "Maybe not, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we're meant to be more. Downstairs." David overheard their voices and closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of the journey, the humiliation, the fight, the ripple, the healing. And though he knew the work was far from over, He also knew that his daughters had been denied boarding once, but never again would they be denied their place in the world. The story of the Cole twins reminds us that dignity is not a luxury, it is a right. Too often, people are dismissed, humiliated, or told they don't belong in spaces they've worked hard to reach. For older generations, this story may echo memories of battles fought in workplaces, schools, or even neighborhoods where the price of respect was heavy. But what this story also teaches is that silence only protects the unjust. Speaking up, even when it is uncomfortable, can ripple into change far beyond ourselves. The Cole family did not let humiliation define them. They turned it into a moment of accountability that touched thousands of lives. In our own lives, we may not control airlines or corporations, but we can control how we respond to injustice, whether by raising our voice, supporting someone silenced, or simply refusing to look away. Every act of courage, no matter how small, builds the world our children and grandchildren will inherit, and that is worth fighting for. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Stories like these matter because they remind us of who we are and what we stand for. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep shining a light on stories of dignity, justice, and hope. Your support truly means the world.